This is cleanup Erlanger, actually. It says Public Works on here, but it's actually kind of a cleanup thing. So whoever wants to take it off and run, Mark, who is going to go with this?
Well, Ms. Pitts or Mr. Cahill, one of the two.
Go.
Okay. We've been meeting for months trying to figure out how to clean up Erlanger and all the problems with our rental property. And so they've drafted an ordinance that we're going to go over tonight, and Mark is going to go over it with us.
Kim's been involved in this from the very beginning, I think, for part of the committee. And this has been going on a lot longer than that. Mr. Hahn and I were talking earlier. It's been about 5 years since he first started researching doing something like this. And I believe there are a lot of other cities tried to do some things. They pulled them back. They didn't do it. Independence being one, Ellesmere, our neighbors being one. They tried to do it. What we tried to do was pattern this pretty much after what Covington is doing. Am I correct, Kim?
I believe so.
Yeah, in saying that. What we didn't want to do was make this too overbearing on the staff that we had now, so we kind of backed off of those initial inspections. So if you notice through this whole thing, what it does is it allows us to do an exterior inspection, and then if we find a violation on the exterior, then it would trigger an interior inspection. At that point in time, there would be a fee involved. There's no fee involved unless there is an interior inspection done. And that would be a reapplication to get this permit to operate the business being a rental property. I sent it out. I don't know that, whatever questions that you all have, and I know there are some. I know Mr. Blankenship has some about doing it. Our goal into this, and I know Mr. Howard sent me an email asking about the application process and some things like that. What our plan was to get this out and get it done, not make this until effective, I believe, July. We talked about July 1st maybe being the effective date of this ordinance. That way it would give us time to notify as many of the property owners that are out there that are operating rental businesses. It would give us an opportunity, the ones that we know, to get those, to advertise it every way we can, using social media, using the printed press and everything else that we can do to try to get this word out, to give them an opportunity to come in and make sure that they're abiding by this. What we have found, the only way we really know if somebody has turned a house, a single-family house, into a rental property is if we find some violation and then all of a sudden go up and knock on the door and give them that citation, and all of a sudden, well, I'm just a tenant. I rent this place. That's what we're finding more and more of. We're not really having issues with those buildings that have 8 or more apartments in them. The fire department do an inspection on those every year. They have to do that and get in the common areas and see some things. But this would still apply to those on the outside because this gives us the tool to get inside if, in fact, we see some outside violations going on. So it would apply to those places like Lorry Drive, for example. They'd have to register every one of their apartments or every one of their units and get a license to be in business, but they would not have to pay a fee to do that unless it was, of course, this whole reapplication thing and we found some kind of inspections. So we tried to make it as landlord-friendly as we possibly could. So we didn't get some of the, I guess, feedback that we've seen other cities encounter from that cost. I know Covington has been doing this for quite a while. They got theirs through that way. They're overwhelmed. We talked to one codes guy down here, and I think what they say, Becky, 30 inspections a day that they're doing, which is a lot. We don't see that happening here. We hope it doesn't happen here. But this was just going to give us another tool to be able to enforce some of those things twofold. One, help clean up the city. Second part of this is identifying those people that are in business, because we're not even sure they got business licenses to do business in Kenton County. We have no idea if they do or not. So we're losing out on tax dollars that way also. So I know that was kind of quick. I know we've talked about this a lot, so we're here to answer any questions or anything anybody has.
Under this ordinance, what happens, Mark, if a tenant calls the city and says, I'm renting a house on James Avenue and our landlord won't do yada, 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 and it's getting pretty bad. Now, we didn't notice anything on the outside. Does that give us the clue to go in and, does that trigger our ability to go in and inspect?
Yes.
All right.
Yes. The way I understand it, Mr. Berg, the tenant at any point in time can invite us in to do that. The landlord on the other side, if we do one of these exteriors and we find something that would trigger an interior, if there's a tenant in there, then the tenant actually has to give us permission to go in. If in fact we don't get that from the tenant that's living there, we'll have to do, is it an administrative warrant of some kind? Mr. Blankenship, I know maybe you know a little bit about that. It's some kind of administrative warrant that would then give us the right to go in. We have had a couple of those already. Greenfield, for example, there are a couple apartments over there that they have called the codes office and said that they had some things going on inside. We went in, issued those citations, got those things fixed, got those people moved to other apartments during the time of those repairs. So we've had that encounter already.
If the tenant invites you in to do this and you find does the landlord then get assessed a fee for that inspection?
No. I don't think there's anything in this that says that at all. No. Is there, Kim?
Well, I guess it depends on where you are in the process. If you don't know that they are renting it, then that's going to trigger the beginning of the process as far as, okay, you have to do this, you have to register, and then they would have an opportunity to fix any violations, and then it would just be the reapplication fee.
Yeah.
But if we know that they're renting and we get a call from the tenant that says, I'm renting, I can't get my landlord to do anything, would you come look at this and see if I'm crazy? And we go and look, is there a fee there?
No.
I didn't think so.
No, it would just be the civil citation process at that point.
If we find that there is a violation.
Then you could revoke.
Right.
If they don't cure,
Right.
and then there would have to be, then you'd get into the reapplication.
And if we don't find a violation, then it's, at least we've been inside to check it out.
Right, check.
Right.
It would be the same thing. We'd have to give them that opportunity to remediate
Sure.
the issue, whatever it would be. And then if they didn't do that, then of course, if they had the permit license, then we could revoke the permit license and start the whole process
The
over
thing that gives
again.
us, under this ordinance, it gives us the trigger to get inside is noticing what looks to be a violation on the outside.
Right, right.
What's the, so we end up doing an outside inspection, we go inside, we find out that these people, the landlord is just some guy that owns the house and renting it and let nobody know about it, has 2 renters living there. That's the process, then we find that out, then they have to apply to get a license in order to rent the place out? Is that how it works?
Yes.
Do I understand that?
Pretty much, yeah. Yeah.
There's no penalty for that they were doing it without notifying us, other than you have to get certified?
Well, that's a question for our attorney.
Did we, I remember.
Not sure if we put that in
I
there.
remember discussing that, though. After the fact that they had so much time, you know, with the information blitz and everything, that if they hadn't registered after a certain time, it seems like there were discussions of, and that might have been when we were talking about, well, what should be the charge, the initial charge. I don't believe that there was any penalty, although,
And then I guess my follow-up-
unless that alone, there might be a penalty section as not registering is a civil
Okay,
citation
and
violation.
at the end of this in section 8, at the end of this, and that is the, I think, one, because it says each separate violation of any provision of sections, well, 3.1 to 3.2 of this ordinance is hereby classified as a civil offense. Would be
Right.
the same thing as any of the other, I think, ordinances that we pass, which would be the $500 and, right?
Per day.
Yeah.
Do we have a follow-up?
$750 for a second and $1,000 for third and subsequent.
I guess I can
And those are significant enough fines to catch the landlord's attention.
You know, our intention with this whole thing, and I think this is all going to be discretion, our intention of this whole thing is to get, to gain that knowledge of who is actually in business, to be in the know of this, to see it and do it. So if in fact we found somebody doing it, we would give them the opportunity, I'm sure, to apply for the license and get it in that amount of time. And give them a significant amount of time to get that accomplished. Because our point in this is not to do that. This is not going to be a moneymaker by any means. There is going to be some costs. Our whole point in this whole thing is to hopefully give us another tool to help us clean up the city a little bit more, since we're seeing so many of these. And again, it's not the large apartment complexes. It's those that are small. It's single-family homes or duplexes, or even some fourplexes around town. We'll give you a prime example, on Short Hill. and I'm not picking on Short Hill by any means, but I'll give you a prime example up on Short Hill. Same thing happened over on Hickory. We found out that these people, you know, it was a fourplex, but all of a sudden, guess what? They turned it into something larger than that by using the basement. And they turned basements into what we would think were deplorable conditions to live, and they were renting those out to people. It happened in both of those locations just recently, you know, so we didn't know. We didn't have any idea that they were there, you know, because we weren't going into those fourplexes that ended up being sixes, you know, at the end. Yes, ma'am.
Absentee landlords, are they even going to give a crap?
What do you mean absentee landlords?
Like landlords that are out of our area that live elsewhere?
Oh.
Just, you know, they own the building.
Well, if nothing else, we can at least start issuing the citations, giving it to them, and also it'll be a violation of this ordinance, plus they're not having a business license to go in to do it.
Well, I mean, they have
You know,
to, it just
those
kind of, I
kind
mean,
of
we've had that issue come up before, just with regular civil citations, where they're like, well, either, you know, they're not getting the notifications because the address of the property is where the citations and all the notifications and the final orders are going. They're like, well, I didn't get that, my tenant didn't give them to me. Well, it's like, well, that's not our problem. You have a responsibility, you know, you should have notifications by your deed sent to wherever you're gonna get it, and you have an obligation to check your property. So, I mean, I had one out of town one time, and it was, you know, she knew she wasn't doing what she was supposed to, but that kind of, you know, brought her feet to the fire, and, you know, like the mayor said, you know, you start getting some big fines, it's gonna make them, you know,
They're faced with the ultimate loss of
pony
the
up.
property.
Yeah.
Because then we get $5,000 worth of fines, we foreclose.
yeah.
And that's the one thing that I don't know that everybody realizes. I think I sent it out on one of the weekly reports after we had a cleanup committee meeting. And I can't remember the exact number it came. I think it was like $73,000 or $74,000 from at the end of November that we had collected so far this year. So we're talking about, we're collecting a lot of fines now. There's a lot of work going into this. A lot of liens have been paid off and things from Kim's office and the way they're handling this now. There's that whole process of making sure that lien is filed, you know, very quickly and getting the attention. So I think that was the number. I don't know what it was by the end of the year, but I think that's what we had talked about back in
It was
November.
it was 80
or December
something.
meeting. So that has grown a lot from the time we started doing this, about what we're actually receiving and getting back.
So the codes guys will still do what they do, and we can just use whatever they write up if we want to go in there,
Yes.
right?
Yeah, it's gonna fall back on the codes enforcement guys to do that exterior, like we said, inspection of the building, which
Same
would
thing
be
as
a
they always
drive-by.
been doing. I mean, checking the yards, if it's a mess, writing them up.
Absolutely,
And then
absolutely.
if we want to go in, to just use that to go inside.
Yeah, and if you noticed on a lot of this, and I'm pretty sure that it remained in this one, we're asking for a lot of information on this application process. Part of that was, and we debated that quite a bit, but knowing who the tenant is inside these buildings, whether it be a single family or whatever, that helps us in the long run. You know, that's building that database that we can use for a number of things, you know, to have and have that there. So it'll be up to them to update that. Now, we're going to put forms on the internet where they can do that very easily so that we don't have to use staff time to get that done and get it completed. You know, hopefully they'll be able to go right on there, and I feel very confident that this will happen, that application process and everything, they'll be able to print it off from there, they'll be able to fill it out, be able to bring it in, turn it in, you know, and then we'll get it in the process. And then if they want to do any kind of updates or any kind of changes to it, anything happens, they'll be able to go right on there and do it themselves.
Well, I just got a question, just a couple small questions. When we send out the stuff, according to ordinance, we send it out first-class U.S. mail. You know, I was wondering maybe if we might want to change that to certified?
Well, we used to do that, and it got quite expensive.
Yeah.
So I think that was I believe that was the reason that was changed, and that's been a couple of years.
It's been a while. We
Yeah.
changed that back then.
The only reason I'm saying this is because we're sending out to a lot of out-of-town people, maybe sending it out to a lot of out-of-town folks.
I don't know that there are a lot of people out of town. I mean, I've had the issue once. I don't know that what do you mean by out of town? Long distance?
Yeah, like maybe up in Ohio or something that
No,
effect.
there hasn't. I mean, I've only had one, and she was like in New Jersey or something, and it was a situation where she was here and she moved away. So I don't think there's that many. You know, as far as an initial notification for the codes office, you know, they do what they do by what's in the PVA records, which goes by your deed. When it gets to me, you know, I take the next step of figuring out any information that I can to figure out where these people are. I contact the bank to let them know what the situation is so that we can get it resolved as quickly as possible if there's a foreclosure, that type of thing. But I don't think that that's necessary.
Don't think
I
so?
think you're just going to be giving yourself a big cost.
I would imagine that in part of the application process, to be able to rent, the landlord is told, give us your current mailing address, your contact information.
Right.
And you are under a duty to notify us in case there's a change.
Sure, right. Instead of just relying on the PVA records, right?
Yeah.
That is going to give you more, you're going to have more current information than what they have now when they issue citations specifically for the property, not based upon the landlord.
All right. The only other real question I've got is actually on section 3.1.4, which states, cause of the residential rental units in each of their residential rental properties in the city and common areas and whatever it is there, they occupied, used, going on down, gives all the offenses, but it says 5 or more separate occasions. I think 5's too many.
That was funny because we talked about that an awful long time, and we've actually lowered that from where it was. We got down to 3 one time, and we got up to, I don't know what it was that Frank had put in there, 8 maybe at one time. I mean, it went up and down. That number did go up and down a lot.
Well, I think 5's still too many. And I'd like to get down to 3 or 4 myself.
Everybody know what he's talking about? Talking about the number of times the police are called or some of those things happen to that. A lot of things that we're seeing, especially in some neighborhoods now, we're seeing those repeat, and we wanted those kind of things in there. So,
Bill, I agree with you. I think that's too many.
They're wasting time.
Or how about putting it in a specific time frame?
It is at the specific
it's
time.
12 months. It's
12
been a
months.
12-month period.
12 months?
Yeah.
Wow.
So,
I vote for 3.
Yeah, that's what I
I
was
like
thinking.
3.
3 or 4.
Time's charm.
what, sir?
The third time's the charm.
Third time, 3 strikes are out. Yeah,
Plus, it
I don't
gives
know.
you in to go in and check things out.
And we talked about that a lot in our meetings. That was one of the conversations that went around. And we had actually changed it because at the beginning of it, it was actually arrest, for certain things to do. And then we thought, well, we're going to a lot of places, a lot of different times and doing things. So it's been reworded.
Is there consensus to change the 3 among council?
I've got another question. Is it usually when you respond on these instances, is it usually the same infraction? Like if they call you and say, they're into a domestic dispute.
Right.
Is it like, is usually all of them a domestic dispute, or is it?
And I would say yes to that. And if it is domestics, you usually go repeatedly to those kind of places and do things. But then a lot of other things go along with that. There'll be some kind of fight going on. It'll be an assault or something. Alcohol or some kind of drug will always be involved most of the time that's occurring. The disorderly conduct would be outside in the common areas when those things were happening. So yes, I'm going to say they would all be pretty much related.
And those things tend to breed holes in the wall.
I mean, I think everybody here, absolutely, everybody here, if you think about it, how many times have the police been to your house? And the amount of time that you've lived there, you can count them, right? 0 probably.
No.
So besides Patty,
always
but
at my house.
Back in the day?
But so if you're looking at that number, I mean, think about what reasonable people and most common citizens do. They never really see the police unless they've been victimized by someone. That has nothing to do with this. So
3, okay.
sounds like
Got it.
3. Okay.
What is the original fee?
The original fee.
Application.
There is no application fee at the beginning. Is that what you're asking? There's none. No. Only if, in fact, there would be an inspection, an interior inspection triggered for something, then it would be. Now, if, in fact, we find those people, like Mr. Longshore was talking about, we find that somebody has been in business and not doing it, we'll give them time to hopefully get those violations fixed and get that license. Our hope is that these people will come forward if we can get it out there, enough, which we're going to try to do.
If they follow the law and they do it voluntarily, like they're supposed to at the beginning, it's no cost to them, other than some time for filling out forms. And then we've got all the information necessary, and it's a benefit to both the landlord and the tenant. if the landlord, if we find the problems, it could be the tenants causing the problems, and the landlord might not know, or depending on how busy the landlord is, and then we can address that. I'm sure a lot of leases have in it damage done to the interior of the lease. You inspect it at the beginning, you inspect it at the end of the lease, and any damage that's done is the fault of the tenant, and they owe the landlord money. So this helps both.
That answer it?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Mr. Blankenship, do you want to bring up some points that you
I
had?
did. I think this ordinance is good, but the concern I had with it was, this doesn't apply until someone brings a problem to the city's attention. And the concern I have with that is, there's some things that could be wrong inside an apartment or inside a unit that the person may not realize they can bring to the city's attention. And what happens in a lot of these cases is the tenant thinks, well, I'll just not pay my rent because they won't keep my property up. And then they get evicted because you can't just withhold your rent. And so basically then the tenant's put in a position, do I pay rent for an unfit apartment or do I risk getting evicted? That's why I was suggesting we might want to look at adopting that Uniform Residential Landlord-Tenant Act, because it does create some rights for the tenant. And it gives the tenant the right to, among other things, pay their rent into court, into escrow, and that way it's a defense to an eviction. And I think that would basically give us a two-pronged approach to this. One is, this ordinance is good, I like it, because it gives the city a means to deal with enforcing and keeping up the conditions of property, but adopting that act would let the tenant have some voice in this as well, and they could then use the enforcement mechanism of the statutes. And I think that would give them a lot of avenues where they would have some better protections, because there may be conditions, for example, that where the property's in horrible condition, but it may not be a building code violation or a code violation. It might be just a lease violation, and the tenant has no rights under the existing law. They get evicted.
Couldn't we adopt both of them?
Yeah.
Well,
Couldn't we
and I don't,
adopt something like this first?
well, and that's what I wanted to ask, because we did find this one too, and I didn't want to say, but 383-500 says about local governments adopting that, but at the end of that, it says, if these provisions shall be adopted by the entity and without amendment, no other ordinance shall be enacted by a city, county, or urban county government which relates to the subjects embraced in that KRS. So does that restrict us from doing this?
Not entirely, because the Landlord-Tenant Act deals with the rights as between landlord and tenant. And this is dealing with the rights as between the city and the tenants, I think, or city and the landlords, and it's requiring a licensure process. There's cities that have adopted this law, and they still have requirements, I think, that landlords register, and they have business licenses and so forth. And I don't think those conflict with the ordinance in any.
Does Covington have both?
Covington has it, don't they? They used to. Yeah.
Okay, well, if they have both, then it wouldn't, we could do both.
There's a number of cities in northern Kentucky who've adopted both ordinances like this as well as the Uniform Act.
There's no state statute about any of this?
In most states, the Uniform Residential Landlord-Tenant Act is applicable statewide. And I think about 35 or 40 states have adopted this statute. Kentucky did a weird thing with it. They adopted it and only applied it originally, I think, to Lexington and Louisville, or something strange about it. The Supreme Court of Kentucky said, well, that's unconstitutional special legislation, and struck the statute down. Then they reenacted the statute to say, okay, any city can just choose to adopt it. And that way it saved the constitutionality of the statute. But it has to be adopted on a city-by-city basis.
Good God.
And a lot of cities around here have adopted it. I know Covington has, Newport has, I think Silver Grove has, Bellevue has.
Ludlow.
Ludlow.
Ludlow. Those are the only ones that or Taylor Mill too.
Yeah.
Those are the only, there's like 5.
Yeah.
5 or 6.
You gotta be quick.
I've always been generically opposed to the URLTA, but those were always under conditions different than what we're facing now. Because Erlanger didn't have this problem 25 years ago that we have now. I'm in favor of adopting this and then examining the URLTA and see if it gives, if we need it. And if we do, it's there. We don't have to draft it. I mean, you just
You can just amend it to,
Right.
right?
Yeah, we would just have to make sure that what we have now in place isn't in conflict with any of those, or, create any kind of problems.
We have to
Or we
remember-
could do it all together.
We have to remember the evil that we are trying to remedy. to get properties cleaned up. It's fix up Erlanger stuff. This addresses that. The fights between landlord and tenant is, I think, kind of an offshoot of that. And I don't know if we want to get into that now or not, but we need to act on this or forget about it. We've been kicking this thing around for months.
Oh, no, it's
35
wonderful.
years.
Yeah.
Randy, go ahead.
I don't think we need to delay adopting this to
Good.
consider
All right.
the other. I'm just saying we ought to consider the other
We
as
need to
well.
examine the other and see if it
Yeah.
works for us. I agree
Because
with you.
I think it is kind of an offshoot of it a little bit.
Yeah.
But I do think it's a pretty strong mechanism, because if they're not getting their rent money because they're not keeping their property
That'll
up,
catch their
that's going to
attention.
get their attention real fast, too.
Right.
We have a PDF that's got a summary of what the unified landlord tenant, yeah, whatever that is. We've got that summary. I can send it to all of you, and you can look at it, and that way you'll be aware of what it is.
It's
So,
your Rolta.
yeah, whatever that one is. See if you want to go on down that way, just as long we do them in conjunction somehow to make sure one doesn't conflict with.
Well, are we, guys, are there more questions about this? Are we ready for our first reading?
Poor Vicky, she wants. One more question.
Yeah, Vicki has a question.
One more question about the ordinance.
I just have a real quick question. I read in here that if you have a new tenant and I am the landlord, I have to send that information in to the city, is that right?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, so every time I switch tenants, they have to send that in.
Yes.
Are we doing that now? I mean, do we have any?
No, we don't have anything right now, and that's
not
what
gonna
will
be
help
much
us build
paperwork
in.
For our people up here to handle, or?
Computerized, right?
We're hoping, hopefully, we're going to do that online, and they'll be able just to update that form and submit it, and it will automatically go in. That's what, yeah, that's what we're working on
And that
right now.
inspection thing too, I wanted to ask about that. That's if we get a complaint or something, and then you give the owner like 48 hours notice before you go in to inspect. Is that right? It's in number 3. It says.
Is it for the initial one?
City provides the owner with at least 48 hours notice of such inspections. And over here it says, if the codes enforcement officer has reasonably determined such an inspection to be necessary.
Okay, which section are you looking at, ma'am?
So it's 3.1.5,
Okay.
and it's A underneath that. Is that something that would have to be determined by a complaint, or is it something that we can observe and then we give them 48 hours?
If we're talking about the application process, we'll do an exterior inspection. If in fact there is something on the exterior that, a violation of the uniform code, then we'll look at that. Then we'll notify the owner that since he's got this violation on the outside, that an interior inspection needs to be done.
Okay.
Okay, so that's the 48 hours. So any point in time, and I believe that most leases are even put in that way, that if landlords want to come in and look, there is some kind of time frame that the owner has to give them to come in and do.
Almost every lease has a right to inspect. Almost every lease has a right to inspect. Yeah.
Right. So, but they can still tell us no, like we said before, and if we encounter that issue about somebody telling us no, then we'll have to go the administrative warrant way about being able to get in, to do that, to see it. I can't see a tenant refusing us.
Yeah.
To be quite honest with you, because they, if in fact there is something on the outside and they've got a problem on the inside, I believe when we knock on the door, they're going to invite us in, because they want it fixed.
You're right.
They want it fixed. Unless they're doing something inside they don't want us to see, they might tell us to come back tomorrow, which is okay.
Clean up a
Right.
little bit.
Let me clean up a little bit and I'll come back tomorrow.
Well, I only have one more question.
Yes, sir.
And as far as the Erlanger residential rental form permit, on section 41.3, it asks for the owner's social security. It asks for the owner's social security number. Is that lawful?
I don't know. Mr. Wickman came up with all those things and we put in there. So whether it was or not, I'm guessing that it probably is.
We're allowed to ask. We're allowed to ask for a social security number. We're allowed to ask for a tax ID number if they have a tax ID number for business, like mine's, 61-0959654, for identification purposes. And yeah, absolutely. We can't publish it.
That's what that's more I'm more worried about it.
It's sealed in our records here. We can't publish it, but we're allowed to have it. Same thing with doctors and hospitals. They get patient social security numbers. And that has nothing to do with them having a cold. But they get it and keep it, and they use it for collection purposes down the road.
I'm just asking the questions, I didn't know.
No. It's a great question to ask.
I think this
And
is
given
the
the privacy
perfect
issues these
opportunity
days.
for you all to realize the importance of the upgrade of these laptops and whatever, because we didn't, like Tom said, we didn't have these issues 20 years ago.
No.
You know, but now, every piece of data is precious. And, you know, and that can't be getting out. And, you know, I think Steve's leading us in the right direction. So, you know.
And investigators, private investigators, if we had to hire one to go find somebody, like I do sometimes in lawsuits, Randy does too. If you have a social security number, there are ways to find where that person is, if they're working or something like that. And I don't know how to do it, but there are ways that are done. It's important information to have.
And just to let you know.
We cannot leave it open to the public. It has to be sealed in our records.
And just to let you know, we're probably going to be using the police software to do that, to gather that information and put it in there. We'll be putting it in the computer-aided dispatch system somehow to get it in there. I'm not sure exactly how that's all going to work, but right now, that's where the codes officers are putting their information. They go in there, they open up the call, they put it there. We have one central place to track all of those things so we can see the number of times and some of those things we've been there. We've even started the whole, owner-occupied rental, vacant. We've started that whole thing inside that system. So whatever information that we get will be inside that system. It won't be out anywhere else.
The bizarre thing about that, Randy and Tim and I we get these forms that are published by the Supreme Court for probate, for this, for that, for the other, and it's requested that we use them. And they have a place on it for social security number, okay? Then there's a court rule, Supreme Court rule that says redact social security numbers. And my question is, why the hell is it on your form if we can't put it on there? So we wound up putting XXX, XX 4329. And it's to protect as much as you can. Okay. It's crazy, isn't it, Randy?
It is.
Yeah, I mean, I make mistakes. They say, you should have that off of there. I said, but it's your form. They don't care. Are we ready for a first reading on this?
Yes.
I really would love to get it
We are,
rolling.
and job well done.
Thank you.
Our dynamic duo, Mark and Daryl, have done an amazing job working on this with us.
Daryl.
I'm going to do this. Even before we have our first reading, I'm going to congratulate this council for its persistence. This is going to be a solution to a problem that has plagued this city for a couple of decades now. And it's not perfect. No ordinance is perfect. But it's going to give us another tool to affect properties that are affecting all of us. And the way you all stayed with it, the diligence with which you worked through all the issues in this is why we have 12 people on this council, because we got 12 different, we covered it from every angle known to mankind. So I'm proud of you. Then, Kim, first reading next Tuesday.
And kudos to Ms. Pitts and Mr. Cahill. I know we've had meetings once or twice a month for the past, I can't know what, and whether or not they were there in person or there via phone or some kind of conference to call, they came and gave us their input to this whole thing, and it's one that's been ongoing, and it's been quite a journey that we've all taken. So, thank you for sticking with us.
And thanks for changing the meetings to 3:15 so I could come.
Oh yeah, we even moved the meetings around a little bit. Yeah.
See, Sydney, see what your mom does?
Causes trouble.
Steve's here. Just wanted, if you're having trouble with the email stuff, get with him. We asked him to stay tonight because I know there were a lot of stuff. I think he's probably told everybody we didn't really turn on all the emails yet and start doing that and getting rid of the other ones because everybody hadn't signed up and gotten to the account. So we'll do that as soon as that happens. But if you need something, he's here. Please get him, grab him, whatever.
When do we get the new
That's it.
computers?
That was our agenda tonight. Thank you all.